Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Pyatt and welcome to my YouTube channel. My goal is to help as many martial artists as possible in their journey and study of Aikijutsu, whether you're a complete beginner or an experienced martial artist. I do videos every Friday, so if you like and enjoy this video, then please don't forget to subscribe to get them straight onto your homepage. Especially because this video is the first in a new mini-series. So for those of you that have been following the channel for a little while, I've obviously done some little mini-series in the past. So we've done Back Fist Like a Bushi, and we have done the Jujutsu applications mini-series. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to probably do a couple of weeks of like sort of single videos, some serious and some a little bit more light-hearted as we've done in the past, and then I'll do a mini-series. And then we'll sort of repeat that cycle. But don't forget to send in requests if there is anything that you want to do, because this mini-series was actually a request that I got when I first started the channel. Somebody said, can you do video on stances? So this is me fulfilling on that promise. So over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at applications of stances. But for this first week, we are going to talk about the 5 L's. Because when I was thinking about what's most important with stances, what should we all know about stances, it came down to 5 L's. So I didn't realise there were 5 L's involved. So my 5 L's for stances that everybody should know is that stances are transitional, they are optimal, they are developmental, they are fundamental, and they are flexible. You can see what I did there, right? Feel free to put more stance-related puns in the comments below. So a little bit of a play of English in that last one, but that's my 5 basic things that stances should do. So let me explain where these all fit in. So my first L is transitional. So imagine that I happen to be teaching on a beautiful tropical island called Okinawa, and have all the beaches in the world that I want to spend all my time on, but instead I'm going to practice beating people up on the beach, and I want to teach somebody how to deliver the maximum power in a punch, for example. So I need to convey concepts that are fundamentally quite complex, like effective mass, which we've talked about before. So how can I teach somebody to move your weight? So if you are a complete beginner, it's very difficult. If I say to Alan, what I'd like to do, Alan, is shift your body weight forward, using your body as one unit, to deliver the maximum amount of force when you strike. What does that mean? So stances in their initial phase are transitional. They show us how we can transfer weight from one place to another. And that's actually why the English word stances is a terrible word, because it straight away creates this impression of like a static fixed posture. So just as a really simple example, if we take just like a nice close quarters technique, and we just take a really simple lower block and then just step through a punch. Just a really very common and some lots of basic out there. So the lower block's 90 degrees, so I'm going to come 90 degrees to my opponent. So the first stance, the Junzuki Notsukomi or Zenkusu Dachi, whatever you want to call it, has brought me at an angle to my opponent. So first of all, the stance informs my footwork, which I'll come back to in a minute, and it's also giving me the capacity to push off this back foot, to drive through and then deliver the punch. So really simple, 1, 2. And obviously the technique, when we do a kata, we'll go and we'll have those 2 photographs. We'll have this point and we'll have this point. But really the magic is the bit in the middle, right? So what it's teaching me, the stance is teaching me how to transition my weight through that punch as I hit it, right? So stances aren't meant to be static. They are merely stop gaps. So for example, nekwashitachi or cat stance. If Alan throws a punch, what I wouldn't do is pause in a cat stance like this, which in a kata it might appear like I do that for a long time. But the whole point of the cat stance is it's only momentary. It allows me just to bring my weight onto my back foot, which then gives me options. So I can obviously kick, and also because I've brought my foot in, it also allows me to pivot nice and easily. So it just gives me options on movement. It might be that it's like a grab, and I'm just going to use that as a pull, just to bring my opponent forward and then do something else. So whether stances are going forwards, backwards, sideways, they are always transitional. The second thing that stances are is optimal. So stances in kata show you the perfect solution to the perfect technique. So they exemplify the movement that you want. So in kata, it's trying to exaggerate and emphasize key points, which is something I've talked about before. It doesn't focus on every little bit of minutiae. But for example, if you've got a kata where you drop into, say, Shiko Dachi and you're in a really low stance, quite often when you look at the bunkai and the applications of the kata, you see that that has a direct link. So as a really simple example, if Alan throws a punch and I want to put an arm lock on, I can obviously do it with this stance, but maybe the kata says, well, take your back foot back, go into Shiko Dachi, so you're using this drop in your body, and it's the drop that actually is going to do the kazushi, and is going to give me a better angle, and is going to enable me to do the technique more effectively. So it's emphasising the optimal movement for me to do, and in reality, however, in real combat, my stance probably won't be that big, which is why we then get to the next one, which is that stances are developmental. And you could also call this point pedagogical, because stances are a teaching aid. So what happens is initially, stances are very large, and they should over time, just like we talked about last week with blocks, they should contract, they should become smaller. Because to begin with, you need a big reference point to understand how to transition from one place to another. You also need a big reference point to understand your own stability. So if you, for example, were, if we were doing like kakia as a drill, well, you want to make sure you have stability. There's no point doing kakia and being completely off balance, as an example. So you will play around with your stance when you do that. And what you'll find, if you were to start with your stance like this, really short, Alan would just do a tiny push, and obviously I'm going to lose very quickly. Equally, if I have a massive stance, I might feel strong here, but if Alan just moves just a tiny bit, I suddenly realise, oh, that's not very good. So I will slowly over time sort of find that medium. So with stances, they will start one way, they will start big, and they will quite often get shorter as I understand that fine line between stability that I need and that optimal point, but then also being able to move quickly. Because there's no point having a stance that's this large, that looks beautiful, but if I actually am then fighting Alan, I can't move very quickly. So he's going to smack me before I've been able to do anything, simply because my stance doesn't enable me to shift. Right? This is fine, however, if I'm going to be entirely defensive. So if I'm just waiting for him to come to me, then maybe I'm nice and strong and can do something. But for me to shift and move all of a sudden from a really big stance is clearly just not going to work. So obviously your stances will get shorter, and that then leads us into the next point, which is that stances are fundamental. Because actually the stance isn't important, really. What's important is the footwork. What's important is your ability to be stable in one moment and to be mobile in another. It's the ability to relax and then to contract, to utilise the entirety of your effective mass in one particular moment. So stances are fundamental to achieving a dozen other goals, which include timing and distance and kazushi and all of the other genri, all of the other principles that make techniques actually work. So without stances, quite literally as our foundation, we will constantly fall short on that. Now there isn't one stance fits all, and this is where the flexible comes in. So, you know, some systems will have some stances that other systems won't have at all. If you look at martial arts from different regions, so for example, if you compare Indonesian and Filipino to Japanese and to Chinese, you will see differences in stances, because stances are quite often stylized. So when you get stylization of stances, the question you just have to ask yourself is, why am I doing it this way? And as long as you ask yourself that question and you understand why you're doing it that way, that's fine. If you ask yourself that question and you think, I don't know, then you have a problem, and then you need to go and find out why. But you will find differences in those stances, and quite often they might be cultural. So it's important that you look at, well, why might I use a shorter, narrower stance as opposed to a sort of longer one? Is it based upon what the history of how the technique's developed, or something else? So that's one aspect. And obviously, sometimes they can just be changed just for style's sake. And in that case, then you've got to ask yourself, well, is this enabling me to deliver and execute the technique in the most optimal way? Or would another stance be better, and has this perhaps just been changed for the sake of the kata? So you need to ask yourself that question, because stances are flexible and can be adapted, but you need to make sure that when you're doing your techniques that you're using the one that's optimal for you. One or two other little points just to mention about stances, and going back to then how fundamental they are, is that stances can be used for multiple different things. So what we're going to look over at the next couple of weeks is we're going to look at how stances can be used for multiple applications for very specific techniques. However, stance isn't the stance at all. It is a specific type of footwork for a specific technique. So we'll look at those in the next couple of weeks. So the other final thing is that stances are also linked intrinsically to your posture. So as an example, if, for example, I do Kokutsu, wrist lock or wrist throw on Alan, if I execute the technique, you can see what straight away it affects his posture. Okay, so if Alan does it to me, if he does Kokutsu and I want to counter it, if I let it get all the way over to there and my posture starts to go, then I'm in trouble. So if I want to counter it, I want to make sure that I enter to the third point and keep my posture, because then I'll be strong. So then you can put the technique on, and because I'm in a good position, because I'm in a good stable position, my posture's solid, I can have that moment to be able to resist it and then to be able to do a counter of whatever description I want. So the stance is intrinsic to my posture, so it's important that my timing is correct, that I keep my spine straight, and the stance is simply the vehicle to enable me to do that. Okay? So, in summary, we have the 5 L's of stances. So we have stances are transitional. They allow you to move your weight from one position to another. They are optimal. They exaggerate the technique. And by the way, that's particularly prevalent in Kabuto or Kokutsu, because when you have a weapon, your distance increases. So stances become even more important because you can really execute the full stance to get the maximum efficiency in your technique. Quite often when you're fighting empty hand at a much closer range, the closer you get, the more the stance reduces and there is less variety in stance. Because simply you can't have a massive variety of stances when you're really close because there isn't time. So that's something to bear in mind, and look at the difference between how your distance from your opponent will affect how you will use stances in terms of their frequency. We then have that they are developmental, so they are about teaching us the progress of a technique, and over time, like we've said, they will contract. They are flexible, right? And in that respect, they can be stylized and they can be changed to suit certain needs. And you know, one stance for one technique can be wide for one person, short for another. Because if I'm teaching somebody who's 6 foot and I'm teaching somebody who's 4 foot, their stances can't always be the same. There's no point giving a tall person a stance that's going to make it really, really difficult for them to move, or they're going to have to drop and they're going to have to break their posture. And equally, a shorter person can't use a stance that's really, really long if it's going to cause them to overstretch. So the golden rule is never compromise your balance, never compromise your posture. And then finally, stances are fundamental. They are the glue that holds all of the other principles together. So they quite literally, like I've said, are our foundations. So it's really important, particularly when you're first learning, that you invest a lot of time in learning the basic stances and how we use them. And I remember my first karate teacher saying to me that if you learn the stances in your kata, you've learned half the kata. Because straight away, when you learn kata right as a beginner, you focus on the hand movements. And if you get the stances right first, the katas become so much more accessible and easy because you see the same movements obviously repeated again and again and again. So it's really worth spending time looking at those when you first begin learning. And then as you develop, then you need to look at how they enable you to increase your timing and your distance and get all of those other principles right by working smarter, not necessarily harder. So next week we'll do the second part to this, looking at specific applications of different stances. So you can check out some of our other videos by clicking the links here, and don't forget guys, if you'd like to subscribe, you can click the button at the bottom, or you can click my face that should be around about here. So see you in the comments and see you next week.